Welcome, everybody, to Edge of the Rabbit Hole. We have a great show for you coming up tonight. Jeff Mudgett is back in the house. Coming up next. All right, everybody, and welcome back to Edge of the Rabbit Hole. Fantastic show up for you tonight. Like I said, Jeff Mudgett is back in the house with us. Mike Ricksecker, author and ghostorian. With me, as always, is Vanessa Hogel, my co-host, and down in the chat room, our chat shenanigator, Shauna, taking care of all of those chatty things. So, Vanessa, before we get into our wonderful guest here, we have a little, well, actually, it's a big piece of news for you. You have another book that just came out today.
I do, and I actually wasn't even I didn't expect to talk about it because we have such an amazing guest. So I was just going to kind of let it slide.
Yeah, well, but a minute.
Thank you. I'm super freaking stoked. Rebel Witch came out today, and it has already hit number 9 in the top 100 bestsellers. So
awesome!
Yay! So
congratulations.
Thank you. Buy the book, y'all.
Speaking of fantastic books, Jeff Mudgett is back with us, and his book Bloodstains is absolutely fascinating. We had Jeff on, it was actually almost 2 years ago now, if you can think about it. It was actually back in the fall 2017. The show American Ripper had just finished up, and so Jeff was the co-host, of course, on that. And it was a very controversial ending. And since then, Jeff has really been diving into what really happened. Of course, what the show was about, and Jeff is going to get into, is about the idea that HH Holmes, serial killer here, who is Jeff's great-great-grandfather, is actually Jack the Ripper. So without further ado, Jeff, how you doing?
Mike, hey, thanks for having me back on. Vanessa, congratulations with your book. And hi, Shauna.
Thank you so much.
Actually, I'm excited to be on with you guys. There's a lot of new material happening about Bloodstains and my investigation into the evidence we uncovered at that exhumation. And then also some extra material coming out about Holmes and the Jack the Ripper question. And from some very interesting people. I've been talking with Scotland Yard. I've been talking with the FBI.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
So
okay.
It's turning from a hoax into something which people may have to consider seriously eventually.
Good. Do tell.
Yeah. So, you know what we're working on now mostly, besides there's a television series being made right now at Paramount Studios, which is going to be a series about the H.H. Holmes epic piece and the murder castle in Chicago. There's also a script being written which covers Bloodstains and the story about me receiving special hidden material that my grandfather had kept from the family his whole life. And when he passed it on, lo and behold, to me. So that's an interesting script that I'm helping on right now. But what I'm working on the most is, and what I used to do for a living at law was, and I think, Mike, you covered it well on your opening. The first 7 episodes of The American Ripper I thought were some of the best television ever created. The recreations were awesome. The author that played H.H. Holmes was superb. The historical facts were great. Some of the open-ended insights into why I believed he could have been Jack the Ripper were well done. But that final episode and their conclusions regarding the exhumation, you know, I was sitting here watching television, maybe like you both were, and I was left with my mouth wide open. I had no idea it was going to end like that. And that left me quite bothered. And I started putting a lot of work into the forensic science that we uncovered there, the evidence that the scientists said when we exhumed him with the court order and sent on samples to be tested DNA-wise to the King's College lab in London. And we're finding some interesting new facts which are changing that entire conclusion around.
Yeah, I remember the last time that we had you on the show and we talked. It was a really confusing ending, as a viewer for me, and I know it was just as confusing, if probably not more so for you. And I have a photo up right now of the skeleton post exhumation, so that the viewers can see that. And it was, as you're drawing down to all these different facts about HH Holmes and the differences that there were between him and these remains, then all of a sudden, those last couple seconds of the show, there was this little blip about DNA, and then that was it. That was the end of the show. And it just, it was jaw-dropping in the fact that it made no sense whatsoever.
You described it wonderfully. And right after that, Mike, I'll tell you how shocked I was. I was on the phone with the two scientists from the UPenn, and we were yelling back and forth at each other, asking, did you see any DNA results? Or did you see any DNA results? And here's the two court-appointed scientists, and I'm the petitioner in the request from the judge to dig him up. And we hadn't seen anything what the show was talking about.
Wow. Now, let me ask you, I guess I might be jumping a little bit ahead, but based on what you just said about the additional research that you've done after the ending of that show and the different organizations that you've spoken with and more information that's come in, do you expect or do you anticipate there to be any backlash from the producers of that previous show if what you find, which I believe it will, contradicts what they said?
It's a great question, and I'll tell you why I'm still not calling anyone involved in the show as cons or frauds, anything like that. I still think the University of Pennsylvania scientists think that who we dug up was HH Holmes, even though the tests and the comparisons don't work. And Mike, I don't know if you remember, but I tried to show on my Facebook page and the Bloodstains Facebook page the photograph of the dental casts that were used to compare with what we dug up with what was buried. Do you remember that, Mike?
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, and remember the show concluded with dental records and DNA testing establish a conclusive link to Jeff Mudgett. And I firmly believe the scientists at the UPenn, being honest, great scientists that they were, who I still consider friends, they think that what we dug up was the monster because the teeth matched the body that was exhumed. Unfortunately, Mike and Vanessa, they would never accept my explanation of who it was we were trying to identify. We were trying to identify the greatest con who ever struck Chicago, all right? We were trying to identify a fraud who used dental casts to substitute cadavers and defraud insurance policies from life insurance companies.
Right.
And I could never get them to admit that we've got 5 pieces of evidence here. We've got DNA that's not working. We have skeletal comparisons which aren't working. We have body types which aren't working. We don't have any indication of cause of death to the cervical spine of a man who was dropped from a scaffolding 3 feet at the end of a rope. And you're letting those all be pushed aside to consider only the teeth, even though I'm explaining to you that was his MO in life. And so I'm right there now. I think eventually, like on the show tonight, on the show Thursday, I'm doing a show Thursday with the defense counsel from California and his DNA expert, and we're going to go through the timeline of how the DNA was developed and the strange inconsistencies that occurred throughout that summer. And I think at some point, guys, with your help, we're going to have the public understand that didn't work. That's not right. It has to be looked at again. And if it can't be rectified, if it can't be proven one way or the other, well, then we have to come back with a conclusion that says we can't determine the ID of what was exhumed. And that's maybe all I can get from it. That's maybe all that will ever be proven from it. But You know, and to give history their due, they spent a lot of money exhuming the body.
Yeah.
They spent a lot of money. They spent a lot of money hiring lawyers, getting permission from the courts. They spent a lot of money from labs all over the world, and they did their best. Why it came out that way at the end, I'm still not convinced. Other than they were ready for the show to be over, and had they just concluded with a statement which said, while the teeth indicate, this may have been Holmes, the DNA is not working out. They couldn't have ended it there.
Yeah, it was just a throwaway black and white screen at the very end of the show that just was mind-boggling. We have a couple things out of the chat room real quick. So we had a $5 super chat from Tom McNicholas. Thank you very much, Tom. Also from Shauna, she says, "Tell Jeff I said hi." And yeah, so she wanted to say hello. And then there's a couple of people down in the chat wondering, I know this is a little off topic from where we were going with the exhumation, but there's a couple of people down in the chat wondering about the connection with the Peitzels. If you have any, if you've had any conversations with descendants, or if there's any connection there between Peitzel and in Holmes and the exhumation.
I came out again to Irvington. I was guesting on an episode of Ghost Adventures with Zach and the guys, and they were in the house where the Howard Peitzel murder allegedly occurred. And, we were discussing, the horrible facts of that murder, and then the two sisters afterwards up in Toronto. So that's a difficult one for me to talk about, Mike. That's probably, of all the murders that Holmes either did or did not commit. I see everywhere I go now on social media, there's people arguing about how many people he murdered.
Right.
And I really don't know. I know he killed 4 members of one family in 3 months. And I know that there is evidence of human remains if we ever get to excavate the post office down into the murder castle. And there's everywhere he went, every engagement he was involved in, Vanessa, there are missing women around him.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah, and we're talking about perhaps the leading expert in chemistry, medicine, and the removal of evidence after murder, all right? So to argue what we think, how many he murdered 120 years ago is pretty ridiculous. And I think there's enough to say he was a horrible mass murderer and terrible serial killer. And the example of the little boy in Irvington, Mike, is probably the worst of all. I mean, this house was rented, all right, premeditated, for a month. So that he could murder the little boy and then leave it there, the body in the empty house.
Jesus.
Yeah,
he actually had his tools sharpened by the blacksmith the day before he carved the little boy up. And that image of him walking to the blacksmith holding the hand of the little boy.
Yeah, he brought the boy with him. Yeah.
It just sticks in my head. It's a tough one to go over.
Now, Jeff, I have to ask you. First, I'm going to backtrack to where we were talking about the DNA and the dental records and everything. And I have a particular interest in this. I don't know if you know this or not, but I've been in the dental field for 20 years.
Okay.
And I am exceptionally curious when you talk about how they dissected the dental part of it. When it came to dental molds and things like that. But my question for you is, when they were extracting DNA to try to test to see if it compared, this is going to sound weird, Jeff, just roll with me. Did they take DNA from the existing teeth in the mandibular arch and compare it to DNA from the other bones of the supposed same skeleton?
What a great question that is. And you don't know how many times that's been put to me by, many, many qualified experts. And I'll tell you, Vanessa, exactly what happened. All right.
Okay.
When Amaryllis and I, my co-host on the show, who's now one of my best friends in life, she's just the most awesome woman I've ever been able to meet. I call her Scully. She's strong, she's brave, she's smart, she's tough, and then she's gorgeous. Okay, and she's married to a Kennedy now. So yeah. So we're walking in the lab at the University of Penn Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology, which if any of you ever get the chance, take the time to go through this museum. They have artifacts from all over the time of mankind. It's fascinating. I could have done away with Holmes and just concentrated on the artifacts in the museum. But so we walk into the lab and they've got the skeleton laid out on the gurney. Mm-hmm. And, you know, we walk in first and we're being filmed and I shocked, I smack her on the side of the arm and I say, "That's not Holmes. It looks like a monkey. The arms are these huge long arms and these legs are short. He was never described like that in any of the papers."
The clavicle bones are too big too. Yeah. And the scientist went on to describe him, Vanessa, as an endomorph body type when Dr. Talbot in the JAMA report described him as an ectomorph, long and thin bone. So I'm confused. I run over and grab the skull in my hand, and the technicians, the scientists, they all had a fit about that, and they told me to put it down, so I put it down, and they rush over. They have the skeleton is perfectly preserved. I mean, it's the most. I've never seen a skeleton a skull over 100 years that looks so perfect, and it's flopping in my hand. All right. Mm-hmm. And I turned to the lead scientist and say, "Janet, Dr. Mudge, this is flopping in my hand." She goes, "Jeff, you're imagining things. It's not flopping in your hand." And I said, "It just flopped again." She runs over and with gloves on, she grabs it in her hand and it flops in her hand. Okay.
So the scientists rush over, they turn it over, they're looking upside down inside and the brain is intact. All right.
Wow.
After it was buried in 1896. And so they get on the horn with the King's College in London, who are the foremost DNA testers of ancient DNA in the world. Okay. And they had agreed to help out history with this test and then the publication of the results. And they put the speakerphone on, we're all there, and King's College gives them the instructions where they want the best DNA sample taken from, okay? Mm-hmm. And they tell the scientists to get out your diamond drill bit, turn the skull over, mm-hmm. and they drill into the petrous bone pocket at the back of the skull.
Yep.
Which was 100 times, they told me, 100 times stronger DNA than you could have got from a molar tooth. Mm-hmm. So, and then they drilled that sample out, they packaged it, they mailed, and they put it in a special box to be handled with all delicate care, and off it went. And that was May 26th. But your question about why they didn't use the tooth is right on, because that was discussed with the whole team right in the laboratory.
Well, my question and why I'm asking this is the mandibular bone, that lower portion of the jaw with the main molar teeth in it, is not attached to the skull. It is sitting to the side of the skull on that table. So unless they tested DNA from those teeth or from any portion of that bone on that particular part of the body and compared it to another part of the body, like what you said, where they took the DNA from at the base of the skull, there's no guarantee that mandibular bone belonged to that body.
That's the first time I've ever heard that, Mike.
When you're actually talking about what you said, the greatest con man in history, when you're talking about somebody like that, if there's no guarantee that's HH Holmes that y'all dug, that was exhumated, that was dug up, what's to say he wasn't smart enough to bury one body and then somebody else's mandibular, the lower jaw, that would match to teeth that were used in a previous case?
I think it's something that needs to be looked into, or it should have been looked into. And I think it follows right along, Vanessa, with the fact that in prison, he was measured at 5'8" tall. All right. Mm-hmm. The scientist at the UPenn, Mike, said he was 5'2".
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a huge difference. I mean, that's not like a inch or two off in like a mistaken measurement. I mean, that's a full half a foot.
Yeah, I'm 5'2".
Yeah, and the anthropologist that I'm on the show with Thursday says that's ridiculous. That's a man walking around in high heels.
Right.
Pretty much.
And they joked about it, saying that, well, he was the biggest con in history. He must have been wearing lifts in his boots. So we went back to that original medical report of his examination in prison, and lo and behold, we found the doctor examining his strange bare feet. Mm-hmm. So, there was no lift in the boots. There was nothing like that. Plus, when we dug him up, there was no lift in those boots. We found his boots.
Well, let's go ahead and discuss the elephant in the room. There are no such things as 6-inch lifts inside boots. They would look that would be Eddie Monster boots or Frankenstein boots. They would have to have a platform on.
I think Gene Simmons does, right?
There you go. There you go, love. Well, they would have to be platform.
Well, imagine you probably had 100 newspapers at the Holmes murder trial in Philadelphia. Not one mentioned his strange posture, his physique, his strange walking methods. None of that. He was a very elegant, well-dressed man who, was very dignified looking. And I've dared any of these people that want to keep bringing those things up to find me one description of him that would cover 5'2" with long arms and short legs. It's just not true. So then, Mike, I'm stuck with scientists basically disregarding the skeletal differences. I'm stuck with scientists disregarding the body type. They admitted to me, and this was on tape, that the cervical spine, the neck, showed no sign of trauma from a hanging. And now we have problems with the entire timeline and the DNA and what really happened with that DNA testing. So we're left with, as I tried to describe at the first of the show, these dental records, which, Vanessa, a dental record is a dentist's file of his patient.
I would love to see these dental records.
Well, we didn't have any dental records, Vanessa. All we had was a photograph of a dental cast, which we can't prove where and when it was taken, of whom it was taken, and by whom it was taken. And then, Mike, we get to the simple part. If this doctor was there in the prison cell to identify, the worst criminal in America at the time, and he had the ability to take dental casts, and he had the ability to photograph dental casts, why didn't he just take a picture of the man?
Right, exactly.
That is an excellent point.
And I think all we really have are some courtroom drawings at that time, which don't look too far off from the couple of photographs that we have of him. And if you just look, and I had it up here a moment ago, of these couple of photos of HH Holmes, just the shoulder structure of him in these photographs is different than that thing that's sitting on the table.
Yeah, his shoulders slope.
It's amazing to me we don't have one photograph of him at trial, in prison, at the execution, the body after the execution. He didn't allow an autopsy. He had, when we exhumed the grave, Mike, we came up with a false coffin. Yeah. We moved over a couple of feet into another plot, dug down 2 feet deeper, and found this concrete sarcophagus. And too many inconsistencies, too many Holmes coincidences, which, I've been studying this thing now for 10, 15 years. And Mike, I've got this team of researchers now, these great guys that dig through everything that comes up about Holmes, and there's something new every day. And every one of them is unexplainable. This man had the strangest lifestyle and life history of any human being that maybe ever existed.
Oh, yeah. We have a question down here from Tom McNicholas in the chat. And you had talked about that the brain was actually still intact. Did they actually save that brain? That's Tom's question.
Hi, Tom. That's a great question. I'll tell you exactly what happened, even though it'll probably get me in trouble. I told the University of Pennsylvania scientists, cut the damn skull open and keep the brain. Put it in whatever you guys use to preserve stuff. And maybe 10, 20 years from now, you'll be able to actually use that brain to study what made this man such a psychotic murderer. And they told me they couldn't do that. The judge had ordered them and me to put everything back the way we found it. And I kind of looked at them and I like winked at them, I didn't say anything more, but I winked at them, hoping they, get the hint. And as far as I know, they didn't do it, although I think they should have.
I would
Jeff,
think so.
At any point in time, did they attempt to put that mandibular bone, the lower jaw, onto the skull to see how the teeth came together? At any point in time, did they do that in front of you?
Vanessa, you're asking some wonderful questions. When they had the picture of the dental cast from that 1896 physician's report, mm-hmm. they took it to their dentistry department at the UPenn, which is world famous. Mm-hmm. And I guess one of the leading professors there came down and inspected the teeth on the remains with the dental cast that we had, the photograph of the dental cast. And he said, they match. And so they gave me this phone call and they said, Jeff, we've solved the case. They match. I said, no. The judge ordered us to identify the remains, not for you to say that what was buried is the same as what we dug up. I could have told you that would match without me knowing anything about dentistry.
The picture of HH Holmes. HH Holmes obviously has an overbite. More than likely, yes, more than likely from sucking his thumb as a young child. And I would almost guarantee you that the upper palate, his maxillary palate, was slightly deformed and almost a U shape where the imprint of the thumb would be in there. You can tell the way his upper lip kind of overhangs a little bit. When you saw the picture of the dental cast, did it appear as if his front teeth kind of came a little bit not to a point, but had a protrusion to them?
I didn't see that.
Okay. If you look closely at his picture, you'll see what I'm saying.
Yeah, I see what you see in the photo. Let me bring the skeleton back up. I don't know if you can really. Yeah, because it's off to the side there, you probably really can't tell.
Well, the protrusion would be on his upper palate, on his maxillary palate.
Yeah, but that's mm-hmm. obscured by the his spinal column there. So.
Yeah.
Vanessa, you being such an expert on teeth, you'll appreciate this. When the UPenn scientists came out with their somewhat of a report, they were mentioning the gold fillings they had found in the remains' teeth. And it was funny because I asked them, why doesn't the doctor that examined him in prison, if he actually looked into the man's mouth, why doesn't he mention any gold fillings? I said, you know why? Because he was looking at dental cast molds.
Whoa. We might be onto something. Tell me, the picture of the dental cast, was it a closed dental cast as if it was just sitting there, or was any pictures taken of it with it open? I'm sure Mike can show you. I included in my Bloodstains Facebook page postings.
Yeah, let me grab that.
Because I can look at those pictures and tell you if there's any fillings in those teeth.
Well, you can't see gold.
Nope, but you can see outline, and I know what to look for.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, this is what I do. I have done this day in, day out for 20 years. And when you take an impression, which I've taken thousands of impressions, I've made thousands of dentures, I've made thousands of crowns. When you take an impression of that, it isn't smooth like your standard enamel. And your teeth have particular pits and fissures that are unique to you. Nobody else will have them. And when they're better than fingerprints.
Okay, but let me put you on the stand and cross-examine you, okay?
By all means.
This is what I used to do for a living.
Uh-huh.
Now, Miss Vanessa, we're not here to determine whether the gold fillings on the exhumed remains are correct or not and match the dental casting. What we're here is to determine when the dentist allegedly inspected the prisoner in the cell while he was alive. Why doesn't he describe any gold fillings?
That would stand to reason if he doesn't describe anatomy, both real and fake, when you're in regards to fillings. If he doesn't describe every detail of those teeth, that stands to reason that that is not the same person that he examined is the one that you guys are looking at.
Thank you very much.
The better question is, why, if he didn't examine them, why is somebody else saying that they're present? He has to disclose all information: overbite, crossbite, frenums, whether they're large or small, any diastemas in the teeth, especially between 8 and 9, which is your 2 front teeth. The diastema is a dead giveaway to a person's identity. He has to disclose fillings, he has to disclose crowns, he has to disclose bridges, he has to disclose everything, because you have to have every aspect in order to properly and conclusively identify a person.
That's excellent, Dan. You see how much fun I've been having working through the evidence of that exhumation to see if we can actually come up with a conclusive determination whether it was or wasn't Holmes. And right now, it's we first started, Vanessa, to tell you the truth, when we first started the exhumation, I believed it was Holmes. I didn't believe a conspiracy to escape the execution and how involved that would have had to have been with the prison officials, prison guards, other prisoners. All that was possible. Now, I'm starting to wonder, with this man who could commit a hoax on anything he wanted to do his entire life, whether this was okay. So what we're doing now is my team and I are tracking down this doctor that made this physical examination. And you know what we found? He's not associated with the state. He's not associated with the prison. He's not associated with law enforcement. And the legend we're trying to verify right now is that he was there on the consent and request of HH Holmes from Chicago.
Okay, I do have the teeth up on the screen right now. I went to your Bloodstains page and grabbed that.
God, I'm
Great.
good. Okay, on the right-hand side, you can actually see the indention, the impression, if that can go up a little bit bigger again, Mike.
Yeah, I can try to expand that a little bit more.
Okay, right there. See the ridges right there behind the 2 front teeth, and you've got all of those ridges. That smooth part back there, how it slopes down, that is where a child's thumb would go, more than likely up until the age of about around 8, between 8 and 10, an extended thumb sucking, not with forceful suction, but enough to show a nervous habit, which I strongly believe that H.H. Holmes had. It was one of his self-soothing ways that he could do things. And on the other, let me see if I can see it on my phone a little bit better. Hold on one second, because I'm having a hard time here. Let me get out of the chat so I can actually see the whole picture. Just one second. Okay. The only area that I could see where there could have possibly been fillings is on, again, that right side, all the way to the back. That's going to be the right side of the mouth. That is tooth number 3, and it's quite smooth. However, I'm going to say that's not a filling. I'm going to say he was a bruxer. He was a grinder. And that is probably why he does not have any of his molars on the bottom, because through grinding, bruxing, and clenching, he broke those teeth. So he has no molars on the bottom. He only has 1 molar on the top, and he's missing tooth number 2.
He's missing a lot of teeth.
Let's see here, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. He's missing 13, 14, and 15 on the upper left, and he's missing all of his molars on the bottom. So he suffered extreme bruxing. You can see the grinding on the front teeth, how they're sheared off on the top and they're flat. You can see those. You can see where he's chipped them. If these are his, if the skull or the body that they had on that table had fillings, that's not this person. Period.
Well, I tell you what, that's excellent material, and I'll take a closer listen to it with in the future, and see if we can go anywhere with that, because the teeth. That's what the two scientists told the Associated Press they relied upon to identify the remains as HH Holmes, Mike. And they basically disregarded, the skeleton, the body type, the DNA. They said they gave up on DNA after the show. That's another interesting point, Mike. We want to get to your audience. 2 days after that final episode on American Ripper, the two University of Pennsylvania scientists went on the Associated Press and said they'd given up on DNA. They made their decision relying on the dental records. And so, we've got some area to cover, but we're getting closer and closer to being able to, I think, positively establish that there is no way to identify the remains as H.H. Holmes.
I'm going to 100% agree with you, because unless they have his doctor, his dentist, when he was living, that has records that they could compare this dental mold to, they don't have a leg to stand on.
Yeah, Jim Kroom down in the chat is saying that he thought that Holmes was born without molars. Jeff, would you know that at all?
That's not what I heard. I heard he lost them, but I'm not. I wouldn't get on a stand and testify to that fact, Mike.
Okay.
No, he couldn't have been born without them, because his mandibular ridge, which is the area that holds the teeth in, you can tell that they were actually lost because it goes flat.
Okay.
If he never had those teeth, that bone would look a lot different.
I'm learning a lot about teeth today.
Yeah.
That's what I do.
So if there's more, so there was not enough DNA to really go down that route. So then why is it at the end of the show they're using that as an excuse to basically discredit the case?
You'd have to have the history executives on your show for that, Mike. All I can tell you is, when the show came out, I'm watching the tube. I'm shocked. The UPenn scientists are shocked. We have a phone conversation back and forth. NBC News comes out and says on their headlines, DNA conclusively matches Mudgett's. I call them, NBC Universal, and talk to the boss there, Lisa Capitanini, and I say, you need to retract that or we're going to have lawyers involved. She investigates that, interviews the UPenn scientists, and they retract their headline. Now, 2 weeks later, I'm notified by history that the King's College has come up with a partial report on the DNA finally. 2 weeks after that final episode, and after those two scientists had said we'd given up on DNA. And 3 months after that college had been able to test that one sample over and over again to find anything. And that's where, the intrigue falls into place. I don't know what I can prove and what I can't prove. All I can tell you is on the show I'm going on Thursday, Mike, this DNA expert who testifies in murder cases for the defense against prosecutorial DNA, and they're citing multiple cases where DNA was falsified to make a prosecution. And he's going to go through step by step with me that timeline when we established statements made by, the people in the know and how they weren't consistent with the final conclusion. And he's going to come up with his own explanation on what really happened.
Okay, so what are what's the new information, new evidence that may have come to light since the last time we had you on the show, since that time that these DNA tests came back after the show aired, which seems a little ridiculous to me. So what's the new evidence that's been coming out?
Well, it's more about the other subject. The FBI came out with an article, Mike, about comparing handwriting comparisons.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah, I remember making the point that the handwriting samples that they were trying to compare with Holmes were at time frames very different from the actual samples that they had.
Well, I mean, the computer software program disagrees with you. It's 97% it came back with. I can only tell you they're going to retest the Dear Boss letter, the Saucy Jack postcard, with some of the Holmes correspondence, and I'm going to have nothing to do with it, so no one can state I'm there to sell books or that I have a bias or preconceived notion. I didn't have anything to do with drafting any of those letters, and they're going to take another look at it. So I'm quite excited about that to see what they come back with. I can only tell you this: when I gave my TED talk, we ran up, the how Holmes ended his correspondence and how Jack the Ripper ended Dear Boss. And, I had an audience of 2,500 and they just went open mouth shocked to see how the same they were and how they fell right over the top of each other. So it's interesting. I can tell you this, the Scotland Yard guys were telling me that they'd long believed that Jack the Ripper had involved at least one copycat. And they were interested to hear my theory about how Holmes had murdered Catherine Eddowes, but not the others, and he had written Dear Boss. And they also told me that they'd long believed it was an American doctor. Now, there's another American doctor suspect as well, which many of your audience will already understand. But, that's interesting stuff. And then we had the linguists on the American Ripper show who stated on the record, I think on the 5th episode, that Dear Boss was written by an educated American trying to sound English.
Yeah, that was interesting. Yeah.
Oh, I found it fascinating. And I'm interested to see when these official entities run those correspondence through the computer software program, which they are now stating they use in their investigations, the ones I used, and let's see what they come back with.
Question for you: when they're talking about the handwriting analysis, the different notes that were left, do they have the physical notes? Do they just have copies of them? What do they have?
Well, they have I think they have the Dear Boss or the Saucy Jack. One of them is original. One of them's a copy. Okay. I don't remember which one it is. I'm sure one of us could Google it up right now. The correspondence I have of Holmes' letters, I have a couple originals that my grandfather left me. The one they used about Holmes writing to his lawyer saying that he doesn't like London because he can't find the New York Herald, which is the newspaper he used to communicate with his team. They did it with a code. And they'd advertise it in the newspaper, Mike, and then they'd run it through a code, and that's how they'd communicate around law enforcement. Which, the story never stops.
This is going to sound like a strange question, but not just analyzing the handwriting, but have they analyzed the ink?
Oh, I'm sure. I would imagine that we were there at the London Museum of London with the curator, who was an incredibly intelligent, fairly young man who had long believed that the Dear Boss letter was not the hoax that all the Ripperologists had always said, that it was a match with Saucy Jack and it was written by the murderer of Catherine Eddowes and maybe Elizabeth Stride, the second woman that same night. Mm-hmm. When I heard that, it was very refreshing because, I get beat up wherever I go to talk about, the Holmes identity with Jack the Ripper based on the authorship of Dear Boss, because many, maybe millions believed that it was a hoax written by a newspaper reporter to sell papers.
Right.
Yeah. People want to go for the easiest to believe. They don't. I'm going to be very honest with you. Most people don't want to believe that other people are smarter than they are. And that they could pull off something like this and simply not get caught. Not just, on this side of the pond, but on that one too. I actually think people find it offensive that somebody can be that intelligent.
Well, can I tell you both a secret about where I've decided to go with this? Sure. I'm fascinated with Jack. I'm fascinated with Jack the Ripper. I'm very appreciative of history, spending the money and the effort and putting out that series about an American doctor possibly being Jack the Ripper. It was very brave of them to do, especially in light of the scandal they'd had about Amelia Earhart. Mm-hmm. And I'll never, I owe them my firm appreciation. But the story about him possibly killing one person in London and writing Dear Boss is fairly minor considering the story that could emerge here fairly soon, Mike. And the evidence is pointing that way more and more every day, that he created the greatest fraud on the history of the American jurisprudence system by using his trial as a chess game, knowing exactly where he had to go to get that blank check to start a new life after he'd been caught with all those murders, executing him, escaping an execution with a crowd of onlookers, and then having another body substituted in its place in the strangest burial that maybe we've ever seen or read about, and then going back to visit the ones who had irritated him, the judge, the prosecutor, the jury foreman, etc., the wife who testified against him, in what's called in every other book about Holmes, Mike, The Devil in the White City, all of them, right, the Holmes curse, okay? And I think that's the story that's going to emerge here in the next, I think it's going to emerge here pretty quickly, and I'm excited about that being far more of a story about true crime than Jack the Ripper ever was.
Any new information on what may have happened to all that money?
What money are you talking about?
I'm trying to remember here. At the end, wasn't I'm sorry, I guess I'm not remembering it correctly.
He was paid money by the Hearst Corporation to write his memoirs.
To write the memoir, right.
And he was given another big segment of cash to do his confession, which turned out to be all a lie, to the Philadelphia Inquirer. So while in prison, he had probably the equivalent of $200,000 or $300,000 in cash.
Right, he had all that money, but it's a bit of a mystery.
We never found a dollar.
Yeah, it's a bit of a mystery as to what happened to it, and so that's one of the things that's kind of fueled this idea about his escape. I was just wondering if there was any new information that's come to light about that.
I'll ask my team to take a look at it. I've never heard of anyone. His lawyer may have collected it from the scene of the execution and prior to the burial, and then returned it to Holmes later. That could possibly be.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
We're just
if he made a great escape, if he's made a great escape, I would think he would want to escape with the money.
That actually is something that your team needs to look into. Is two separate things. One, after Holmes was supposedly executed, did his attorney appear to be a little bit more flush than he should be? And the other, and I mean in regards to what Holmes would have given him in order to aid him into doing this. And the other is those involved in his prosecution and subsequent supposed execution that I believe he escaped. Did any of them have any mishaps? Strokes of bad luck?
Yeah. Oh yeah, there's been many authors who've written about the mishaps associated with the Holmes arrest, the trial, the incarceration, the alleged execution, the alleged burial, and it's a fascinating subject to look into. It's strange things, which is pretty much how Holmes murdered quite a few of his victims. They were strange murders. There weren't many like the Jack the Ripper disembowelment and slicing of the neck. And more of them used chemistry, more of them used poison, those type of things. So, but you're right. Those are great things to look into. And I don't think anyone ever has before.
Wow. That would have been my first, because it's not, and I don't mean, they were haunted by the ghost of HH Holmes. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about somebody who is exceptionally intelligent, unbelievably cunning, very, very clever, and probably so self-sufficient that they would never, aside from an attorney, depend on anybody else to do their dirty work. So it would be interesting to know if any of these people that were involved in the case, in regards to his prosecution, if anything happened to them after, and if so, is there any way to link those situations to Holmes? As a bystander, who reported something, or as somebody who dropped off a box for somebody, you know what I'm talking about without going into detail.
There's no doubt about it, and those are, once we establish that there is no evidence proving the remains were Holmes, those type of issues, Vanessa, are going to be looked at harder.
Good.
And we're taking it one step at a time. The things you brought up earlier about him being this cunning, intelligent, devious human being. While there's people arguing about how many he murdered or the crimes that he committed all over the place, no one's arguing those facts you brought up or descriptions of him.
Absolutely. And the fact of the matter is, it doesn't matter it does matter how many, but what needs to be looked at more closely is not how many, but how it was done. That is where the information lies, not in connecting the victims, but in understanding his psyche. The way that it worked was he almost, to me, has a Machiavellian trait to him, to where he thinks along those lines. And I mean, that's important. That's important information in profiling.
No, I agree. He was a very intelligent man who could have been whatever he wanted to be. He was successful in business, anything he tried, except he had that edge, that psychotic edge with a tint of evil, which, he describes himself having been born with it. I don't know where that came from. I know one of the reasons I wrote my book, Mike, was to see whether there was any truth to the things that, that I was reading constantly about those genes, those chromosomes, those genetics could be passed on through a direct paternal line. And, that's more. That's what I try to tell people when I go on shows like yours always. You can find 100 books on HH Holmes. You can Google up 100. My book, Bloodstains, is about my grandfather revealing that terrible secret to me when I was 40 years old. And what I found looking into what was legend, what was lore, and whether any of the strange inconsistencies, idiosyncrasies I knew I was growing up had anything to do with him, right?
Right.
And that's what I was trying to write in the book. And that's what, guys, I'm very excited to tell you and your audience is what I think Hollywood's going to make a movie of.
That's fantastic. I'll be first in line to go see it for sure.
Mm-hmm.
No, I'll be first.
Well, yeah, of course. But let me ask you this, and this is based off of a question from Brandy Star Leaper down on the chat. Now, during the show, there was some reconstruction done off of descriptions to basically show how the descriptions of Jack the Ripper could have been H.H. Holmes. Basically, they were doing like a facial reconstruction. Brandy's question has to do with the skull. Why wasn't there ever a facial reconstruction done with the skull to see what this skull actually looked like in life?
Another, this is some of the best questions I've had on one of these shows yet, and I've done hundreds. I was told, Brandy, that the UPenn had done a CT scan. They'd done a 3D. Vanessa, what do they call it when you do a 3D of a skull and you wrote imaging?
Yes.
And they've done a comparison with that drawing from the London expert. And to tell you the truth, it's 2.5 years now, everyone. I haven't 2 years. I haven't seen anything of it.
Wow.
Well, and I'm sorry, but a 3D imaging, that isn't going to do a darn bit of good if they don't know muscle tone, body mass index, the time of year based on how he carried his weight. None of that is going to make a damn bit of difference, because the sinew that you have underneath your tissue, everything that affects your facial structure, whether or not he had proper canines, all of that, top and bottom, all of that shapes your face a certain way. So if they don't build it up first with clay and the points based on where things should be, a 3D imaging is not going to do a damn bit of good.
Yeah, but Vanessa, we see them do all the time. They'll do 3D imaging of some sort of prehistoric skull, and they'll start doing it off of that.
But they will do that after they've first done a clay rendition. After they actually have, because each one of us has a different depth depending on where we're at in our face. Our cheekbones are different based on what our weight is at the time. All of that plays a part. And if they don't first do a clay rendition dictating how deep those valleys and crevices are that we have in our face naturally that are specific to us, they won't have an accurate image. They always start with that one.
Mike, have you ever showed Vanessa the photograph of the skull that I put on the Bloodstains page, the beautiful image that the UPenn scientists took in the lab?
Let me see if I can grab that here.
Because, Vanessa, what you're saying is right on with a number of experts who've talked to me, that they don't see that skull matching those two pictures of Holmes sitting there in his bowler hat. And it doesn't look like the same sinew underneath could have made that facial structure.
Exactly.
Now, that's way over my expert level.
All of that plays such a huge part in it. He was what, in life, 5'8", slim build, 160 pounds, slight protrusion of the front teeth. His jaw, his cheeks would have been slightly sunk in because he did not have those rear molars to fill out his cheeks because of the lack of those molars. His diet. You know what,
Vanessa? Vanessa, let me interrupt you. That's a great point you just made. Because of the lack of those molars, those cheeks are going to sink in on an image, aren't they?
They are going to sink in on an image. You also have to take into account the fact that he doesn't have those back chewing teeth. So his diet is going to be different. He is going to be slimmer. So
excellent.
Yes, every little bit of that plays a part in deciding whether or not this is the person you're looking for.
All right, there's the skull. Now do it as side by side with him there.
No.
Here, let me switch to the other pic of him on the other side. There we go.
No. Not unless he lost his teeth way after this picture was done. That's not the same person.
The scientist told me that didn't happen because it had overgrown where the teeth had been lost.
What?
How would they know? But no, see the structure of the dental cast? It shows a flesh structure.
That is the mandibular ridge that is only slightly covered by tissue. If you were to run your fingers along those, it feels like hard bone. No tissue would be over that.
All right.
I've fitted way too many dentures.
Well, Mike, I gotta thank you, Mike. You bringing me on the show, and I learn more from you both than you learn from me.
I'm learning too here. I mean, Vanessa's she's the tooth fairy.
I'm your tooth gal. I am your tooth gal, but I'm trying. My professional brain is trying to process how any scientist would say that would be filled out and covered by tissue. That is a physical impossibility. It will not happen, period. Case closed. End of discussion.
Maybe I misquoted them.
Well,
they're not a dentistry though. They sent the teeth up to compare with, the department in dentistry at the UPenn. They're anthropologists. Now they would have known more than I did, but they admitted they sent it up to their top-notch experts in teeth.
Then they should know that. The only other explanation, let's go ahead and call it out. The only other explanation is if in those pictures, if he was at all embarrassed by how he would be perceived in a picture, it was not uncommon to stuff your cheeks to give you a more rounded appearance.
He's capable of that. He's capable of that.
Yeah, that would not be uncommon. So I'm not going to say that didn't happen. But I will say, looking at that skull compared to that picture, that's not the same person. Plus, the skull, if you were to build up the nose of that skull to fit the frame of that skull and what it should be with the face, HH Holmes's nose is too sloped. That one would be more protrusive. It would protrude more. It would be more from the brow coming down.
I think the chin looks a little different too, actually.
And chin looks very different. HH Holmes's chin is rounded. This one is very angular. The cheekbones are higher. If you go to HH Holmes's picture and you come down about 1 inch to 1.5 inches, that is where you're going to see his cheekbones start. If you go to the skull, they're less than 1/2 inch below the eye sockets. They're very high cheekbones. It does not match.
Well, there you go.
Tell you, this is fascinating stuff, and I got to tell you, when I match this up with the problems in skeleton and body type, and then Thursday I'm going to have an expert. I know he's going to tell me that with a perfect sample taken by trained scientists and tested by the foremost lab in the world of a direct paternal line, he's going to say there shouldn't have been any problem whatsoever coming back with direct numbers. And it's going to be interesting to see how this all adds up finally, Mike, when we have all 5 pieces of evidence in a line that I can write out and submit as a report.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's going to be absolutely fascinating. And I definitely encourage everybody to follow along with you on that journey. So we are at our hour mark, so we need to wrap it up. Now, how can everybody find you so they can continue to keep abreast of everything that's going on in this case?
Well, I tell you, go to the Bloodstains Facebook page, and if you'd like to take a look at the book, you can go to www.bloodstainsthebook.com. And I appreciate all the help I can get, but I'm going to keep that Bloodstains Facebook page up on the investigation and up on the progress we're making with the movie and the television series. And because as you can imagine, I'm very, very excited about that. And then you guys keep a spot open for me to come back on in another couple of years and fill it out for you.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. We'll have you back anytime. Anytime.
And thank you for letting me talk dentistry. Finally, I get to use my skills.
All right. Well, let me say, Shauna, good night. Mike, good night. And Vanessa, good night. You were a big help.
All right. Yeah.